So this is the fourth part of our OC4 coaching series on sales messaging. And in part one, we talked about perfecting the elevator pitch. In part two, we went over defining your value proposition. Part three, building a sales messaging structure. And that's all culminated up to part four, sales outreach at scale. So really taking your messaging and putting it out there and hiring people to help with the sales messaging and all of those little nuggets to expand your messaging. So, oops, sorry, went over that too quickly. Hold on. Our agenda for the day, we're going to start quickly with introductions of our coaches who are on the call today. And then we will talk a little bit about messaging at scale, sales message channels, best practices for email, sequences and cadences and tools, building a winning CTA, results, what to expect, and levers, what to change and when. So we'll have our coaches go ahead and introduce themselves, starting with Kelsey.
Hey there, my name is Kelsey Galarza, and I work with early stage startups in putting their sales and marketing together. So a lot of these topics that we're going to talk about today, I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. So it's coming from a lot of experience and hopefully a lot of fun stories.
And I'm Jason Auden. I work with companies of varying sizes, both startups and more mature enterprises, and just how to sustain growth and constantly get better, and some pretty interesting stuff like this messaging sequences or series has been a lot of fun for us.
Hi, I'm Rudy Poe, and I've had a couple of different companies. I've been a media guy most of my career, and I also started a company called Just Food for Dogs, and have done a lot of work in media, helping different companies get their start.
All right, and I know Kerry said he's going to be jumping in a little late, so hopefully he'll be able to come in and participate in the conversation. So, but we'll go ahead and get started without him. All right.
Cool. So let's really jump into this. Yeah, and thank you for setting the table, Michelle. We have a lot to get into today that's pretty meaty. So we're going to again talk about why we're here, and we've kind of done a lot of work that's important before this. You can go to the next slide, Michelle. It talks about kind of that we have an elevator pitch, right? You know how to just describe what you're doing. The value proposition and messaging strategy are really critical. And I would have loved to spend 10 minutes at the beginning of this showing some of the messaging frameworks that Kelsey sent out some homework. Fantastic stuff. I think we just didn't have the time for it today, but that's a lot of really important work. But that's really the beginning of the work. You need a lot more. So I just have a short list here on the next slide of some of what you need that kind of stems from this. Michelle, next. There we go. And really, and I'm not going to read all of this, but you need lots of messaging and copy, like all of its words. You can do some exercises to figure out what imagery goes with this, but it's a lot of words. A lot of it's going to go to email. We'll talk a lot about email today, but it's your website. It's all of your email. It's messaging, advertising, social, you name it. All of these words are going to come from the work that you did before, but it takes work to get there. And let's kind of talk about what this means on the next slide. So it really is about those words and figuring out the right place to use the right words, because you might come up with a really cool message that's not right for every type of channel. And then you really want to figure out, when to send it to whom. And most importantly, once you do all of this, you need to drive some action. It's either, take a meeting, buy our product, do whatever. So that's really why we're here today, is to help you start to, take all this hard work you've done until now and turning it into things that drive results for your business. So where do we start, Kelsey?
There are so many opportunities to share your message across many, many different channels. And when we say channels, we probably mean something different than those of you who sell hard goods through the channel. And here we're talking about communication channels. And there are now 4. There used to be 3, but now we really talk about kind of 4 types of media. And I'm sure Rudy will add a lot to this as well. And this is a graphic I stole, but the idea of paid, earned, and owned media has been around for a very long time. And the idea is that you need some combination, and that the nexus of those things is when you've really nailed it. So you can see here is a long list of the different kinds of examples, and there are many, many, many others. But you know, paid media is what we think of as advertising, right? You pay to get your message in front of people, and ideally you provide a call to action where they do something as a result, right? Watch an infomercial, great example of paid media. Earned media is when someone is talking about you, right? So this is when somebody writes an article about you, or somebody is writing a review about you, or you are, so this is kind of, think about a lot of times as PR, and a lot of content marketing is here, and user-generated content is here to a great degree. Owned is the only place where you really get to have, you know, your spin on things. Like, it is under your direct control, right? So paid is to a large degree, except for sometimes you don't get to know exactly which audience it's going to, and so forth. But owned is you create it. So this is your website, this is any, you know, collateral that you create, and so forth. And then these days, the shared media is really kind of the next level in terms of people taking what you're creating, making it their own, and sharing it with their networks. So you really have a lot of choices of where you could get your message out, and that's actually what makes this so hard. So if we go on to the next slide, all of us, you know, we did a little pre-meeting, and we knew this would be a hot topic, which is, so you can't do it all. Like, you literally don't have the resources and the time to do all of those things on that previous slide. So where would you start? So as I thought about kind of an e-commerce company, these were the places where I recommended that you start. But I want to turn it over to Rudy and have him describe like where he would prioritize given the limited amount of time and money a startup has.
Well, I mean, one thing, kind of an overall thing, wherever you start, whatever your company is, what makes sense for you. I mean, I think one of the big outcomes of all the things that we've been talking about is, you know, this really is kind of your brand, but, you know, what is your brand? And I think that whatever you're doing, it's kind of thematic, right? We've kind of developed our theme for what we are, and we've developed a voice, right? So it's a collective voice. I mean, there's going to be different people obviously doing the talking, but all these messages need to sound like they come from one place. You know, another thing, I think, when you're like, if it's a website or whatever, you know, there's always going to be some kind of follow-on thing to whatever. Whoever was looking at your site or just heard about your company, they're going to have to go talk to somebody else about it, right? So in a way, we want to give them the messages that they can repeat easily, you know. So whatever it is, whatever story we're trying to tell, we want to make sure that that's concise and kind of a thematic thing that fits our brand.
Michele and Jason, what do you have to add to that?
Jason?
Yeah, so, you know, I think I've come more from the B2B background, but when I think about, you know, my buying process, either, you know, I'm either just like, if I need a new cable for my phone, that's pretty easy. That's a commodity, you know, just you have to be in the right place at the right time. But for more strategic things, it's, you know, I tend to really trust influencer marketing is something that's important. Who has written reviews that I already trust, and how do you do that? And influencer marketing could be a topic all of its own, but even for a small company, you can get traction very quickly, you know, if you have a quality product and kind of get the right trusted people to talk about it. So if you get lightning in a bottle, you can really amplify that quickly.
Yeah, I think the thing that I would leave you here with in B2C, your primary goal, you should be trying, like the thing you ought to be trying to do, unless you have some big considered purchase, for most products, you're trying to get people to buy, like kind of as soon as possible without as much consideration. So that's your goal. Now your mileage may vary, right? So depending on what your product is, it could be a long considered purchase, or it could be, as was pointed out, you know, kind of an impulse buy.
Yeah,
No,
I was going to say, oops, sorry. I was just going to say minimizing friction from the beginning. So even whether it's B2B or B2C, getting them to that purchasing or decision-making process, you want to make sure that that's as frictionless as possible before you start driving a bunch of people to go to that process.
The only other thing I was going to add is that, you know, you don't just get right to the buying part. I mean, I think to some extent, there's always going to be some kind of educational process that you're going to go through. You know, you've got to bring them on and gather that trust and give them the information that they're going to need. So that is walking through a process. So whatever you're doing needs to build on that and head in that direction.
Good point. And next slide, if you would, Michele. What Rudy just said is even more extensive in B2B. The education part could take a long time, especially some of the startups in technology where you might have something that is totally new. Like it may not be something people know they need. And so you're going to end up doing a lot of work to educate them to understand why the problem should be solved, even more than how your product can solve their problem. I'm sure you have more to add there, Scott.
So yeah, I think, you know, from a B2B perspective, the goal really is important, right? It's how do you get the conversations? Because I found a lot of, especially like founding CEOs who also run sales, you know, if they can go meet with customers and talk to people, they just have this energy and way of talking about the product with that accelerates the sale and they can really go faster. But how do you get meetings with the right customer targets? And so those goals are different. So that could be a lot more phone scripts. You know, I hate to say it, but cold calling, emails, you know, a lot of social. So it's just getting those meetings. And certainly once you get the meeting, even if you get a meeting and the CEO of a prospect company says, sure, we love this, you know, it still takes 15 more meetings to get the sale closed for most, you know, especially technology type purchases. You know, that takes time. But if you get the meeting, that's what accelerates the business. And so just the goals there, the outcome is different. So we get the call to action. You're going to find your call to action isn't, you know, click here to try now and get free shipping. It's, you know, click here to meet with our experts or to learn more and to engage directly with us.
Yeah, exactly, Jason, what I was thinking here. And I would say this, at the stage you guys are probably in, I kind of call this founder and a buddy sales. So what Jason was just saying is like, you know, you're likely the expert in your product and you're likely doing the outreach yourself. And that's why in my example here, I prioritized phone and email, and it might be in the reverse order, because while you're really nailing your message, the passion and the knowledge you have about the problem and the solution are going to help you sell. And so, you know, I would say if you're just getting started, don't get too cute, right? Like just get out there and make some sales so that you can learn something as fast as possible.
Yeah, great point. You know, if you get the sale, that's what's important. You know, go back and figure out how you got it to do it again.
100%. Okay, so with that said, we just harped a few times about email. We actually could make an entire discussion about email. So I'm going to cover just a few of the considerations, but this is a topic that is really pretty rich, believe it or not. It seems very simple, but it's really pretty rich. So if you would go to the next page, please, Michele. Just a couple of basics that everybody should understand before they even really get started, just to avoid you stepping on a rake, basically, right? We just want to prevent you from hurting yourself. It doesn't mean you're going to be perfect right out the gate. You should understand that there's two different kinds of emails, and they have two different kinds of purposes and effects. So you can send one-to-one email. And when I say email here in this case, I might also mean things like direct message or LinkedIn messaging or those kinds of things. I'd probably use the word email in that case as well. But if it's me to you, now you can do this in bulk, and I'll talk about tools in a second, but you know, that's kind of a one-to-one email versus gathering up a list of, you know, 20,000 people and blasting out an email. The mechanics of them are different, the goals of them are different, and the results of them are different. I won't spend a lot of time on that, but I will also add that the laws of those are different. And so if you're in B2C, You have some fantastic new privacy laws here in California called the CCPA. Plus, you also have to comply with existing old, fairly unenforceable laws like CAN-SPAM, and Canadian laws and European laws, and lots of them, right? There's a lot to deal with from the blasting standpoint. For the most part here in the United States, one-to-one emails are low risk compared to those. So keep that in mind as you're trying to think about what is the best approach for you. You will also find that one-to-one emails are more from I want to get a meeting than I want you to buy. Lists, right? So where can you get lists? You can develop lists yourself by creating fabulous content like Michele does and getting people to sign up for it and collecting their email addresses as an opt-in email. You can rent them, meaning you go to a trade publication or a consumer publication that makes those available for your use. You can buy them to use in the one-to-one sense from companies like ZoomInfo. So there's still, and you can get them on sort of what I would call the gray market. I personally would totally advise against that, but you can't. So you can get these lists in a lot of different ways. The thing that I would really recommend is for best effectiveness, we talked about this kind of in a light fashion last time, but your personas are different and the message should be different. The same is true with a big fat email list. They're not all the same, so you'll have better success if you do some segmenting. We're going to show you some examples here in just a second and have you try writing the copy, the actual words, but things that you want to pay attention to that have a big effect include the subject line. That affects how many people will open your email. The length of the email itself, which may differ depending on what you're trying to do. But generally speaking, studies have shown that shorter is better. And then Jason's going to cover in a little bit more detail about how to create the correct call to action. You're not doing this for your health, right? You want somebody to do something as a result of getting your email. So from the mechanics standpoint, you do need to be worried about deliverability. So this is why I said I would not recommend, buying from Bulgaria a list of 1 million names, right? That you will bork your email sending domain, and that could affect the deliverability of your actual transactional messages if you have those going out. So you got to be a little bit careful here. The powers that be do take things into account like bounce rate, meaning people who aren't, that email address is no longer valid. Spam reports, which people absolutely do, even in B2B. And, just kind of the general acceptance of your message. So the better you are about these 3 things above, the better your deliverability will be. One note about tracking, people always talk about opens and clicks and click to open, and I think I have some examples of the data there. These are things that can be manipulated, so you need to be a little bit careful about your tracking, and you can use benchmarking, but really your own results over time are even more interesting than the benchmarking. Any of you guys want to add anything to that? That's kind of a lot.
There was one thing that
you covered so much, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
There was one thing that I did want to bring up, which also goes back to the B2B. Let me see if I can get back to the B2B slide. Is also when I was in B2B in my previous company, a lot of what came up, it was e-commerce, was that it's not that different from B2C in the aspect of that you're working with an individual and you should be personalizing your messaging and treating that person as an individual, not just a means to an end to getting their company as a client. So having personalized email and investing in really things that are actually important to that person is really how you want to go about approaching your sales strategy versus diving in saying, I have the best solution for you, you're going to love it, really focusing first on what are the struggles, what are the pain points that they're dealing with.
Yes, I could not agree more wholeheartedly. If we had a lot more time, I would describe why the segmentation to me is so important, and it has to do with scale. But if you're just getting started, what Michele just said is the gospel. You should personalize each message to the person. the personalization itself, meaning insert the person's name or company name or anything like that. The mechanics of that are available in any email service provider that you may use, but it's really more about making the message resonate to the person that is going to affect your actual results.
I think real quick, that also goes to after not just getting the sale, but by keeping the customer. I mean, this may sound crazy, but at our dog food company, we still handwrite a thank you note to everybody who comes in from the salesperson, thanking them for coming in. And
Love it.
that you can't believe how well that kind of thing works. So anything to make people feel important and continue to be important and valued as a customer is going to serve you well.
That's lovely. That's a great touch. Okay, so let's see what this kind of could look like in the good. We've been in this series, we've been kind of showing you some examples of some good and the not so good. Here I'm showing you some examples of short, medium, and long. These were all, I would say, not terrifically effective. So I would have put all of these in the one-to-one emails that were meh effectiveness. This top one on the left, that was literally all the email said. There wasn't a love, there wasn't a dear Kelsey, there wasn't a love Greg. This was literally the 100% sum total of the email. I thought that was actually quite interesting, and I hadn't seen that approach very often. The next one down is a little bit generic, even though it's personalized dear Kelsey, and theoretically, any company would want more inbound leads, but then the rest of it is totally generic, and I was meh by that. The third one was completely off base. I don't do anything that would necessitate this product, so it was the wrong target, and there was a horribly long email that I have no idea what we were talking about here. So these ones were like, you can kind of get an idea of just looking through your own inbox and thinking to yourself, would I reply to that? Would I even say thanks but no thanks to that? While you're making your own messages. Okay, then the next one, if you don't mind. So these are the blast emails, right? So those ones were the one-to-one. These are blast emails. These ones on the left, I would say, were on the less effective standpoint, not the least of which is why that one on the top left, I actually included in the screenshot the fact that this message wasn't spam, right? It was, hello, it was generic, thank you for signing up for a trial. I forgot what this thing was, or that I had signed up for a trial of it, so that didn't help me at all. Incredible deals on buying more licenses. If I can't remember what this thing even was or why I wanted to try it, I have no reason to buy it, right? So they forgot that part. These ones on the right, I thought were actually incredibly good. Struggling to get in front of your LinkedIn leads? Yeah, we thought so. That is a very common concern. So they were using a problem statement that is likely to resonate with their user if they have a good list. And they are very direct and say, we will scan and connect automatically with the people you want to know. Wow, that could not be more crystal clear, right? So I thought that one was really, really excellent, and the creative is simple and cute. The same one with the one on the bottom, a little bit more detail, but not a lot. They tell me, why there's a problem, how they can help me be successful, and a clear call to action. So these are some examples you might want to keep in mind when we get to the next slide, or I guess not this one. This is the averages. These are totally average, mean. And B2B has generally higher outcomes here, and B2C has generally lower. But look at these numbers and read them and weep. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this in terms of what to expect. But the 2.6% of anybody who receives your email is going to do anything, and that could be clicking to unsubscribe. So this is really a numbers game, and being above average is the only way to be successful when you're an early stage startup. So this is about sequences or cadences. So one email is not likely to do the trick. So in B2C, you have marketing automation that you're going to have a whole huge long campaign, and you may have some complex stuff where it has to do with whether they looked at your cart or whether they looked at certain kinds of products or, where they are in their purchasing cycle. If you're in B2B, this could be just a series of emails designed to get somebody to respond. But one way or another, one is not enough. We talked in one of the sessions about your message needing to be repeated a minimum of 7 times. Well, I think my number for this email outreach for B2B is 9. This here is a cute kind of story brand / hero's journey version of the different ways you could approach it. Each of the different emails and touch points you may have. So think about email as just one of the touch points. Email, phone, social media, direct mail if you're fancy, personal connections, voicemail, like the list goes on and on. But each of your touch points should be a part of a chain, and each of them will have their own response and results rates.
Can you imagine building this if you didn't have all your messaging strategy from last week figured out?
Great point, Jason. No, like it would be brutal, right? And you would be totally haphazard. As I just mentioned, you can add in a lot of different touch points. Touch points don't need to just be phone and email. You can definitely incorporate lots of other things like social engagement. One-to-one video, you may have received some of those yourselves, is freaking incredibly easy to do and free. You should try it. And then depending on your industry, direct mail is still, it's still like really, really a good channel. We've seen in the medical business, direct mail crushes it. So it kind of depends on your industry, but you got to try all of these things to see what works.
Well, I think especially when you get to doing business, like proper business development, you have either some, inside sales or business development folks, or you just want to try something new. Like I didn't believe one-to-one video until a couple of years ago. We tried it. I said, great. And then what we started doing was anytime we didn't have a phone conversation with somebody, but maybe we left them a voicemail, we'd follow up with that one-to-one personalized video message. And it was not just a generic one. It was like, I sat down and be like, hey, Kelsey, I'm really sorry I missed you. I just want to talk about these 2 things. This is what I want to talk about. Please hit me back. Let's have a good conversation. Because we're in B2B, your goal is to have the conversation. The one-to-one video follow-up killed it every time. It takes work, right? Because you're sitting recording a ton of videos and sending them out. But man, if you can do that, it's so powerful.
Super powerful. Your results are gonna skyrocket. You'll be surprised. Michele, you want to add anything, or Rudy?
Yeah, another thing that I just wanted to jump in and say is that from my previous role managing sales in B2B, is that depending on the industry and depending on the product, you'd be surprised that how valuable calling and talking to people on the phone is as well. In that same way that people are so, especially my generation and younger, afraid to pick up the phone, maybe a little bit less so now that we're all remote, but we made our best sales from making connections and having conversations with people just by picking up the phone and calling them. And cold calls are very, very difficult, and we didn't have a ton of turnaround with that, but calling on all of our leads and having conversations and following up with people that we've worked with in the past, even somebody who bought from us 3 years ago, we had phenomenal performance from that. So I think that that's something that it sucks. Sometimes it sucks getting hung up on 3 times in a row or whatnot. But I would say, if you get the process down and you use it strategically, you can get a conversation 1 out of 10 dials. So, and one other thing too, because I studied Sandler sales training, which I don't know if anybody's familiar with, but is a pretty common and successful sales methodology, is the most common thing that salespeople say when the person on the other line answers the phone is, "Hi, how are you doing today?" And so they say to never answer the phone that way or start your phone that way, because instantly people register salesperson, wall up. So thinking through strategies to get people's wall down, no matter what your process is, just like with email, how Kelsey showed those emails before, the ones that looked so generic and so obviously salesy versus ones that were unique and stood out. I think you want to think about that customer wall, because nobody likes salespeople, but people like people who are like themselves or that are different in some way and stand out.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, like email, calling could definitely be its own, whole session. And it's worth checking out some articles and reading some best practices on calling to hone your own practice of it. But it is very, very, very effective still.
One other thing, whether you're sending an email or whatever it is, I think if you can sort of step out of your own shoes and put yourself in the receiver's shoes to think, would I want to get this email? Would I want to get this message? How would I react to it? I mean, I don't think people, I can guarantee, I mean, some of the stuff like, even like on LinkedIn or something, somebody wants to follow you and then they hit you up right with a sales message. It's like, well, would I want to get that email, or would I want to get that message? So I think if you would take 2 seconds, it's like, how will this be received? It might help you get a little perspective on what you're doing.
Okay, so now let's talk about the meat of what it, so you're putting together some email or some other communication. What do you want them to do? Jason, why don't you help people understand what they're trying to get to happen?
Yeah, so part of it, the sad truth is it depends. But ideally, the thing that gets somebody to click on a call to action is creating some sense of value. Am I signing up for some valuable content, downloading a white paper, getting a free sample, a trial, whatever. Like the call to actions that I've used the most that are effective, you're creating something of value. And to kind of follow up that instant gratification, especially if like you're asking for an email address. Hey, great, give us your email address. We'll send this thing right off to you. And then now you've captured their email address, which is nice. And you're giving them something that hopefully you've done some good content marketing and can give them something back. And that works B2B or B2C. I think, again, we could do a whole set of sessions on the words you use, but really, making it, don't be passive in your calls to action. It has to be, do this thing, buy now, tell me more, tons of great examples out there. And it should never be about you as the company, right? Or really me as the company. If I'm selling it to you, it's about the person doing it, right? Hey, do you want to, look slimmer and, be whatever, here you go. It's about your positive outcome for the person taking the action. And I've been seeing a lot of big corporate marketing lately. And these days, companies love to talk about themselves and what they're doing about the current situation. And I do not care, because it's not about me. It's about what they're doing. So what? If they said, oh, here's what we're doing for you, I'd be a lot more interested. There is obviously all the legal stuff you talked about before is really important. But even to get me to give my email address, one thing I really want to just to mention is that you can still say, hey, look, I'm not spamming you. I'm not selling you anything. What we're like, all the email lists I sign up for are like, it's just high quality content. So, just make that promise and follow through, and you'll grow a list of people who are more loyal. And don't overcomplicate it. Right now that I've told you that it's all big and complicated, if you've got a great value, if you've got something like either a sample or a trial, download now, whatever, send this to me. Your CTA can be real simple, and that's okay. And just try it and test it out to see how it works. We'll talk a bit about how you can fine tune things later. But I think this is a good place to give people a chance to kind of practice and get some feedback like we have in past sessions.
Yeah, so now it's time for you to try. So it's hard to just bust out a sales email with a call to action in a 5 or 6 minute exercise. But what we may have you do is try to write a subject line, or try to write a call to action that you think would apply to your product. Or if you're not feeling that ready for that, maybe look through your emails and look at some emails that you saw recently that you might think are good examples or bad examples that you might want to share. So we'll give you guys a few minutes to kind of think on that.
While you guys are writing some ideas for email strategy, writing an effective marketing or sales email, one of the things in my previous company that we did that was extremely successful, we had usually a 4 or 5 email drip campaign. And at the very last email, we would always, and again, this could be specific to industry. This was mostly in education, selling to teachers, for selling books to teachers. We would put I'm so sorry to bother you. Can you just do me a favor and let me know, which one of these applies to you? And it was an ABCDE email. And I think that little bit of ask, just to ask them to reply in the subject line, ABCDE, and the A was, not a good time. B was, I'm not the buyer. C was, I'm not interested. I don't need you. D is like, let's set up some time to talk. And it was our most highest performing sales email that we sent out as an email blast, and got a lot of engagement out of. So sometimes now it's going to be different for every industry and what you're doing, but if you identify an email that you find that's really successful and gets a lot of engagement, to try and replicate that and repurpose it in other areas and other campaigns. You don't want it to be exactly the same, but that was just one example of a campaign for some reason that was always really successful for us to get engagement. And it's also better to get a no and move on than to keep chasing after somebody, because people just don't like to say no. So if you give them that out, it can be beneficial for both your time and that person's time.
Yeah, I mean, that exact topic is something I talk to people about every day. Like, there is absolutely a time to quit. And I like to have the sales reps make their 9 efforts and then put it back to marketing, to let marketing nurture those people to see if they'll take some kind of action again, because otherwise the sales rep is chasing lower and lower and lower value targets over even a longer period of time. I once had a client who had a sales rep who his average number of attempts against their database was more than 100. And it was like, those were low percentage shots. So we don't want you to waste your time as a founder, entrepreneur, or salesperson. So we just said this is hard, and it's really hard, not just email, but all of these different channels. So you're going to, we talked a little bit in depth about email because it's the thing that we think you're going to probably want to start with. But in any one of these channels, there's an inverse relationship between time and money to see results. And that's really to see positive or negative results. Like, so you can accelerate your learnings by pouring money on the job, right? You could spend, $50,000 in AdWords and Facebook and LinkedIn ads tomorrow if you wanted to, and you would get a lot of lessons because you would have a lot of statistics. You can also spend $0 and keep going at this for a while using, stone tablets and a chisel. You will still get the same number of results eventually. It's literally an inverse relationship between time and money. You want to have to balance those things so that you can get learnings and move on. And Jason's going to talk a little bit about the levers here, but just know that you're going to have to experiment, and you can either go slowly with little money or go faster with more money.
Yep. And by the way, going fast does not mean positive results immediately. It just means you're burning money faster. So
Exactly.
Positive results still take time and effort. And I believe there's some, depending on your business, every business has some minimum amount of just sunk costs that you've got to do before you get something, good. And, part of it is you just have to, be rigorous about looking at the data and what works so you can constantly get better faster. But, as you're, regardless of if you're doing this manually for free, just grinding it out, or you've got some VC money and you want to burn through a big ad budget to do some experimentation, regardless of how you're doing it, it's probably be somewhere in between. You really at the beginning, you're going to say, I'm going to change this, I'm going to change this, and pull all these different levers trying to change your outcome. And part of this is you have to be thoughtful about what you change and when. Use data to drive your decisions. Don't pull all the levers at once, because then you're not going to learn anything, because everything's different. So, we already had some great discussion, even feedback on things like A/B testing, and when you find something that works, as long as it works, you don't have to stop it. You can do other things too, but you could find that, running this ad word at some low volume gets you some kind of base response rate. Cool, great. I worked with a company, and they had their top performing blog was from 3 years before, and it got 3,000 views and a number of clicks on the call to action every month. So we left it up there because it was still good. And, you know, and that ended up ranking, like it was the highest ranked page that our company had any place, was that one blog. Great. But also if something is clearly just not working at all, just stop, you know, retrench, it's okay. And just think about, again, your business and your environment's different. You know, in B2B, you tend to need to run strategies for a quarter or two. You know, you have some, depending on your cycle time, you kind of shape your funnel and how long it takes to close. Just don't get over eager trying to change everything. You know, keep testing and tweaking, and, you know, make big changes if you have to, but do it based on data. And, you know, my words of wisdom on pulling levers, Rudy, I'm sure you've seen a lot of this on what works and what doesn't. So there you go.
Can I just tell you a really funny story once? This is
Yeah.
like following the data. Like when we started Just Food for Dogs, I was like the only one who believed in the data, and I was looking at everything and this and that. We were throwing stuff against the wall to see what would work and this and that. And we wrote a single post that we actually didn't see for a long time. It was for dog food. It's like, can dogs eat popcorn? And who would ever think, right? So it's like, okay, whatever. It was just another thing. And then we was going through the data. It turns out that one post had 3 times more hits and was shared and everything more than anything else. So you might find happy surprises when you dig through the data, and then you can take that and do something more with it. You know, if you know that there's something that's of people's interest, you take it and build on it. So, you know, the data is everything, I think. So, and it is a research process. So you have to be able to know what's working and what's not. So you're not just, you know, being random about it.
Yeah, Rudy, that was my point about remember statistics class I'd added here. I totally agree with you that you never know what's going to be working until you use the data. Just keep in mind that the data can trick you if you have small numbers. So if you're just getting started and the amount of traffic to your website is, you know, 45 a month, and that popcorn article is the one that's pulling the most, and it's still, you know, only 3 people who viewed it compared to the 2 who saw the other one, yeah, it's 33% better, but not statistically significant. And so just keep your high school statistics in your mind a little bit as you evaluate these choices, and don't quit something that might be working too soon, which that's why I really like Jason's point about, you know, multiple quarters. Just don't pivot too quickly because you just might not have enough data.
And if you think something might be working, you might just want to investigate it a little more and try something to validate that or verify that that's working.
One thing I was going to say is that also, if you find a piece of content that's working really well, to make sure that it has an effective call to action and that it's really leading you to the next step in the funnel. Because if you have one post and it brings in a ton of traffic and they go and then they leave, that's great. You're getting brand exposure, but that's it. So really leveraging, okay, we should probably throw a pop-up in here and get people to capture their emails, or, you know, a button to get them to try this thing or download X, and kind of keep them moving down the funnel, I think is also really important.
What a great point. Yeah, that blog that we had that was 3 years old and was the best thing on the site didn't even have a CTA until we looked at it and saw it was the best one. So yeah, absolutely, that's a great point. All right, I think we got one more thing to talk about before we can get to some Q&A. Oh, I guess we don't. I thought there was a slide on building a CTA, but did I miss it? I'm confused.
You did it.
Oh, that's right. It's done. That was before. Hooray! No, that's great. That one's already done. I forgot that we made that change. Good job, everybody.
All right, so we did get a couple questions that came in, starting with Sabi had said, let me pull it up. Proper lead generation tactics. So I know we covered this a little bit in the beginning, but Kelsey, do you maybe want to speak to that a little bit?
Sure. The proper lead generation tactics could vary widely by your business and your industry. And so You know, a lot of people there, you can go, if you Googled what are the best lead generation tactics for my business, you will find probably 50,000 articles that will speak on what they think they should be. You really should probably try to start with whatever is the simplest, the most direct way to get to the step that you're trying to get to, whether it is purchase, like if it's purchase and if you have an e-commerce product that you just need to get traffic to, and you have a great landing page and you're pretty confident that people will buy it if you can get them there, you are probably going to go for advertising. If you are a B2B product or service, you are probably going to want to start with founder and a buddy sales and start picking up the phone and dialing for dollars, because those two things are the fastest way to learn. I think Jason did a great job about talking about keeping things that are working and then modifying them. You know, keep going if they're working. I always call that the pancake stack. Like if you have something that's working, great, keep it going, add something else. Because each of these different tactics has different conversion rates. I think we've decided as a team we're going to do a whole session on funnels. So each of these things has their own conversion rate to whatever the action is that you're looking for, either next step or purchase or whatever have you. And so you're going to need to have a blended approach, not unlike a portfolio of, you know, of stocks and bonds, right? Like they all have different rates of return. And so I can't really answer your question specifically in terms of what are the best, but you're going to want to try to experiment with them.
I pulled up this channel slide because that was in the beginning that Sabi had missed. Was, you know, I think we talked about before that all these sections, depending on what your product is and who your market is, some of these may be more important than others, and figuring out which are the right lead generation channels and optimizing on those. For example, influencer marketing. If you are in beauty, fashion, pets, whatever, and you're not using influencer marketing, you're missing out on a huge opportunity. But if you're in HR, I mean, I don't think you really need to, you may not, unless you can get creative, spend a ton of time focusing on finding an HR star to rep your HR technology. So it is a little bit of experimentation, but because I also think it is good to try things and think out of the box rather than thinking, oh, that's so specific to that industry, it would never work in mine. So I think that's another thing too, is to be creative. And when it comes to paid advertising, if you're working to try and move different levers, like Jason said, to figure out what is generating the most leads, I recommend starting with a small budget and going from there. Social media, you can actually get pretty far with a small budget. Facebook, for example, and that's a great way to just test out ideas for very cheap. And then you can expand it out based on your results. The one platform that I've discovered that is typically expensive and doesn't perform terribly well, but it depends on what you're doing, is LinkedIn. Their advertising platform isn't the best. But the other social channels, I think that you can do a lot of experimenting that way before you dish out the big bucks for other advertising or paid media opportunities.
I think you made a great point about being experimental even outside the box. But if you wanted to create a short list of what is probably the place to start, I would start by looking at your most successful competitor. See what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And Todd Hirschberg just mentioned too, from SEO, which is always great because it's free. I mean, other than the effort putting into it, that's a great way to get leads. And he, for all OC4 members, does offer a free technical audit to help you with your own media. So if anybody wants to learn more about that, that's also an opportunity. I did have another question I wanted to cover, and that was from Bree. And she said, thanks for the great presentation on the topic of one-on-one personalized video. Any recommendations for the best platforms to create video? And how do you send it out so it's not flagged as spam, i.e. attachment, link, etc.? So I believe Jason had a couple to recommend. If you want to speak a little bit to that, Jason.
Yeah, so we used Vidyard and HubSpot because it just happened to be we were a HubSpot shop at the time, and Vidyard integrated really nicely. And I think Vidyard they stored on their server, and it kind of the email that was sent, it was kind of embedded in it. That worked really well. I mean, I had also tried things as attachments, but a lot of time the video to get a decent quality is like too big as an attachment, so you need something else. I know Kelsey, you've used some other stuff as well, right?
Well, I do use Vidyard myself, and it embeds, like you said, really beautifully, either as a thumbnail or just as a link, and that way it doesn't hit any of the spam filters. But Loom is a very popular alternative as well, and there are really a number of them now.
Yeah, so just try it. And I think, when you'll find that any of those providers will have a CTA that's like free trial. So, try and see it works. And, I think we got away with a lot of free Vidyard before we started paying for it.
All right. Well, any last thoughts before we wrap up today, guys?
This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this, and I think we've got some ideas for what to do next as well. I mean, I really enjoyed this. So thank you all for joining live, or the people watching the video. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you guys for coaches for putting this all together and for participating in this series. It's been a lot of fun covering so many different parts of sales messaging. And again, I wanted to emphasize that if you're a member and you want to meet with us one-on-one, please reach out to me. You can email me at michele@oc4v.com and I can coordinate that for you. Or if you just want us to review a piece of content that you've written, if anybody's curious about learning more about membership, you can also email me about that. And then we'd love to hear what you would like to see next time. If there's a particular topic we covered that you want to learn more about. This particular session was very meaty, and there are a lot of different topics of conversation that we could dive into. So definitely give me your feedback. We'd love to hear, what are you interested in learning more? What did you like about this series? What could we add next time? We definitely want to offer the best experiences we can. On that note, thank you guys.
Thanks everyone.
Michele. Thanks everybody. This was
really
great.
fun.
Bye.